Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome tonight. My name is Douglas Jefferson, and I'm the Senior Vice President of the National African American Gun Association. And tonight we're going to have a conversation about some of the recent law changes and the recent Supreme Court ruling on the Second Amendment and what kind of effects that's going to have on folks out here. So, joining me tonight is a great panel of individuals who are going to have this discussion tonight. So, the first person I'm going to introduce and bring up will be, of course, our president and founder of the organization, Mr. Philip Smith.
Hey, Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Phil. Thanks for being here tonight. Next person we're bringing up is Miss Joy Allen.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, Joy. Great seeing you. Great having you here. And last but not least, we're going to bring up Mr. Chad King. Oh, Chad, you're muted. But let's hear that wonderful voice.
Nah, y'all don't want to hear my voice too much. But good evening, everybody. How y'all doing?
Doing great. Thanks for being here, Chad. So Joy, she's hailing from North Carolina. She is on the leadership team for the North Carolina chapter, North Carolina Triangle. And Chad, he is the one of the co-presidents of the Black Bottom Gun Club, Detroit chapter of Naga, as well as our Midwestern regional director. So welcome all of you tonight. Welcome. Thanks for being here. So we're going to just kind of jump right into things. I've got some questions lined up that for us to tackle here regarding some of the recent law changes and the Supreme Court ruling. So we're going to start off with the Supreme Court ruling first and just throwing this question out to the panel. Let's talk about what kind of effect that ruling is going to have on some of the carry laws out here. And you can talk about it from the standpoint of where you are currently, and also from the standpoint of how it's going to affect some of the folks in the more restrictive areas of the country, places like in New York and New Jersey, California. So I'll turn it over to Phil first, if you want to kick us off with that.
Yeah, sure. The question: how is the rulings affecting nationally folks who are gun owners? I think the initial push will be felt the most in New Jersey, California, New York, because those folks have been just literally under the gun, under a rock. They can't do anything. And being able just to walk outside your house and conceal carry in New York, in California, is just going to be like a breath of fresh air. Folks can finally have some sense of security when they leave their house. So I think it'll be most felt in those areas those states that are most restrictive. And to me, New Jersey, New York, and California are the three culprits that really try to oppress folks that want to exercise their gun rights. Nationally, I think it's still going to be felt not as much because folks that are having some level of freedom still have the reinforcement of the verdict, and that's kind of like a wind behind your sails. So the Second Amendment, at least from the Supreme Court, is going to back you up a little bit more. So I think overall it's a good thing, and definitely New York, New Jersey, and California are going to be a little more better off for gun owners that want to exercise their rights and leave their homes.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Phil. And I just want to remind everybody that's out there watching, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Share the video amongst your family and friends, whether they are Naga members or not, because we definitely want to make sure that we spread this knowledge, because we're really here to have a good conversation, a good knowledgeable conversation on these topics tonight. Chad or Joy, if you want to jump in on that first question.
I'll defer to the good doctor first.
I'll say here in North Carolina, we're a shall issue state, so we're not seeing a lot of change as a result of the ruling. However, there is a lot of conversation, and I think everyone is a little bit nervous, especially in minority communities, about what's going to happen on the side of the law as a result. So basically, we've seen the ruling come down from the Supreme Court, but that still leaves a lot of room for states to make decisions. And here in North Carolina, for example, we are a shall issue state, but there are restrictions for example, you can carry a gun at 18 or have a gun at 18 rather, but you can't carry it until you're 21. So I think there's some nervousness and some buzz of that because we know these states that have been restricted for so long that those who are in positions of power will come up with some ways to get what they want done. And that's where we have to be really careful. Once states, take on that responsibility to say, hey, we're going to fight back, we know that things begin to happen that can often be detrimental to certain people, especially people of color. So I think there's some nervousness around that as well.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like Joy, Michigan is a shall issue state. It has been for some time now. I think that what we're seeing is an evolution or almost a reclamation of gun rights, because before you had this period where gun rights were able to be restricted by states, have this inequitable distribution of what was legal and what was not legal relative to gun laws and gun rights. But over the past few years, what we've seen is an increase in the amount of constitutional carry states, right? So we've got right now, I believe, 25 states that are constitutional carry. And this Bruin case, I believe, is an affirmation or reaffirmation or reclamation of the right to own and carry a firearm to protect the individual outside of your home. I think that what we'll see is certainly, again, to Joy's point, some nervousness about what this all means relative to the African American community, how we're going to be perceived as we carry. We already know that we've already been facing an uphill battle relative to the criminological stereotype of Black folks with guns. And I think that Naga has done a great job of challenging and breaking down that stereotype. But there are still a lot of people who have not been reached. And so to those folks, they're going to look at this like, okay, if this means you can carry a gun outside the home for individual protection, what this may mean is that law enforcement may have a more a hair trigger on their firearms than they already do have. But overall, I think when you look at this from a longitudinal perspective, I think it's a good thing overall, because what it means is more freedom for the person. And what it can mean is more freedom for communities as more individuals within a community exercise these rights.
Excellent. Great commentary there. I think all you guys have really good points about the new Supreme Court ruling. Me personally, I think one of the big benefits of this ruling itself is just the fact that the Supreme Court took the case in the first place. Unlike a lot of other rights, there's not really a long history at the federal level when it comes to Second Amendment law, constitutional Second Amendment law. There have been very few cases that have been taken by the Supreme Court regarding the Second Amendment from even the very founding of this country. And so we're really in a new day and age where we're going to see, I think, a lot more of these type of cases go to the federal level to answer questions, because it's been a long time coming to really have a standard put in place that everyone has to abide by, that all states have to abide by when it comes to the Second Amendment. And as was recognized in the Bruin case, the Second Amendment is due, that high level of respect, that high level of scrutiny as any other constitutional right. If we look at something like the right, like the First Amendment, there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of cases in case law regarding First Amendment rights. So most of the questions that come out there about the First Amendment have already been answered by the Supreme Court. So we don't see the court taking a lot of those cases, because since the founding of this country, you had all of these cases that have answered many of those questions. Now, certainly not all the questions being answered, and there will be another case that'll have to go to the Supreme Court level to be settled when it comes to the First Amendment. But we just haven't seen that with the Second Amendment. So I'm really excited to see that these cases are being taken up and being discussed, because once again, we just haven't had that standard from across the board. Now I saw a question in the chat was asked. Had a gentleman was asking about can one conceal carry in Louisiana based on the new laws and legislation. So I want to make it something clear when it comes to any type of legislation that comes down from the Supreme Court. Even if the Supreme Court says that something is unconstitutional, the states still must adjust their own laws first before that actually applies. So the Supreme Court says like, hey, they've made a decision. Now the decision is made is up to the states to make sure that they change the laws to reflect the decision, the new standard. So for Louisiana, and I'm not sure what their carry regime is off the top of my head. I'm not sure if it was a may issue state going to a shall issue. I suspect it was probably shall issue already. But there may be some things that they may have to change due to this ruling, but I just couldn't say definitively because I'm not 100% familiar with the particular laws around carriage in the state of Louisiana. But that was a great question, though. Very good question. I'm sure other people had similar questions, similar concerns. All right, so now we've covered, what that effect is having. We've got to cover, and what some of you've already alluded to, is talking about, what the response has been, and particularly when I mean response, the response of the states. As you know, there are some states like a North Carolina, a Georgia, a Florida, typically states that already have pretty permissive carry laws that are not really going to change a lot of the laws, have a urge to do so because they already have a lot of those freedoms on the books. But other states such as your Californias, New Yorks, your New Jerseys, and then even some cities like, your New York Cities, your Chicagos, they're likely not going to take this as it stands. And we've already seen that happen. So now let's talk about what have been some of those reactions that have come out of the restrictive states, out of those restrictive areas. What have been some of those laws and those challenges that politicians, be they mayors or governors or state reps, whoever, have made in the face of this new Supreme Court ruling? And I'll just throw that up for anyone to answer.
I think we can see through the media that there's clearly some frustration by those who are against firearms for whatever reason. And the politicians in these states that are most restrictive, almost all of them, especially in New York and California, there have been, there's been newscast after newscast, interview after interview, where they have clearly expressed we're going to fight this. And I think we have to remember, as you mentioned, when a ruling comes down from the federal government, the states still have opportunity to adhere to that ruling. But within protocol, as we've seen throughout history, you can make things very difficult for people. So I would say to that, we can't breathe just yet. We shouldn't relax just yet. There's still a fight for those of us who are standing up for our Second Amendment rights. We should not have to, as they said in the case, we shouldn't have to prove a reason to exercise any right. Right? The Second Amendment is no different than any of the others, as you've mentioned. But these lawmakers and these politicians are publicly saying, we're going to, in their minds, keep our streets safe. And in their minds, they're going to do that now through policy. We can make a process so difficult that you cannot operate in the rights that you've been granted. We can make a process basically discriminatory to make sure that the people we don't want to have a particular firearm can't have it. That's what we need to be concerned about, and not necessarily from a panic perspective, but just in being prepared. As a people who really believe in our rights, we need to make sure that we are not only voting, but showing up at meetings, writing letters, making phone calls at the ground level to ensure that we are not suppressed through policy and process. And that would be what I think is probably the biggest concern right now for some of those states.
So just a bit of background for Michigan particularly. So Michigan used to be a may issue state, then it became a shall issue state. After it became a shall issue state, there were a lot of restrictive laws and things like that. I don't want to say restrictive laws, excuse me. There were a lot of restrictive processes. And you had to get interviewed by a county gun board and all of this stuff. You had to meet this this wide amount of requirements to get a concealed carry permit. County gun boards were disbanded in 2015 in Michigan, and then after that, what we saw is that the concealed carry process began to be taken over by the county clerks and the Michigan State Police, right? When I look at this ruling and what can potentially happen, well, first of all, what we've seen in a few states like Maryland is that they've already issued a directive. The governor has issued a directive to get rid of the good and substantial reason standard that they had. Massachusetts has done the same thing. New Jersey, Delaware, Delaware hasn't done anything just yet. California got rid of their good clause requirement, or let me rephrase, they directed the agencies to stop requiring that demonstration of quote unquote good cause to get a concealed carry permit. So that's a good thing, right? But to Dr. Joy's point, what we've seen is that some of these same states have began to implement processes and procedures to make, even though it's a shell issue state, to make it a little bit more difficult. So for example, Massachusetts, the state legislature passed an amendment to concealed carry laws to comply with Bruin to get rid of that reasonable exercise of discretion. But they also require in-person interviews with licensing authorities and add new categories of prohibited carriers, right? So there are things that have been in place. What we've seen in New York as well is that they have the Concealed Carry Improvement Act that was passed on July 1st, I think it was. And with that, they put a ban on quote unquote sensitive locations like public transport, government buildings, places of worship, so on and so forth. And it designates all private property to be gun-free zones unless the property owner deems otherwise. So you have this combination of, on one side, they're complying with the ruling, the Bruin decision, but on the other side, on the back end, rather, what they're trying to do is make it much harder for people to exercise this right. And I think that we're still going to see that battle, so to speak. But I think, again, longer term, what we'll see is those things kind of relax, because there are going to be lawsuits. There's already a couple of lawsuits in California and Colorado, Florida as well, to challenge some of the policies or procedures. So I think that we're still going to have this, unstoppable force meets an immovable object. With the unstoppable force of the progression of gun rights, I do believe is going to win that out over time.
Yeah, let me, I'm going to coattail what Chad and Joy are saying. First of all, is just a lot of anger that these states are showing to their citizenry. How dare you want to carry a gun? Why would you want to do that? And I think there's going to be a lot more pushback in terms of members and citizens in these various states pushing back and saying, you know what, we're going to sue. And I think lawsuits are going to be filed in a large amount, New York, California, New Jersey, to fight back against what's being presented to them. To me, it's just arrogance. Gavin Newsom in California, he has a law now that he promoted that you can sue, not sue, but there's a standard of moral character that the gun owners have to show, or you can sue them for not having the proper marketing of a gun and gun violence. So I think that's arrogance. They've had it their way for so long. When people are pushing back and legally pushing back, they're going to try everything that they're possibly doing, and that's going to be done through policy and enforcement. Enforcement being the police going out and making sure that policy that particular state has in hand is reinforced on the citizens of those particular states. And I think that's a bad thing. But we have to vote. That's the best way we're going to combat it. Vote, and definitely file those lawsuits if you think you're in a particular state that's unlawfully preventing you from exercising your Second Amendment rights. Don't be afraid of that, and push back just as hard as they're pushing you.
Excellent commentary. So I'll chime in for a second here. You guys touched on some of the things that are going to be issues going forward. There are a couple other things I want to make sure that everyone recognizes. So I don't remember who it was that coined this phrase, but it's a brilliant phrase, and it really describes a lot of what's going on. To Chad's example of some of the law passages in New York recently, essentially what we're seeing states doing, like New York and California, those restrictive states, they're still trying to find ways to uphold what were previously legal, but now been found to be unconstitutional gun permitting regimes. So they still want to make it as hard as possible for legal, law-abiding, good citizens from owning and carrying firearms. So they're doing what I heard called "shall issue, may carry" laws. So they're going to issue a permit to you to say, hey, you can carry this firearm on your person for protection, but we're going to so restrict the places where you can actually carry it that it makes it nearly impossible from a practical standpoint to have it on you as you go about your daily life. So they tried to, in New York particularly, say like the entire island of Manhattan was a sensitive area. Supreme Court rejected it outright, but they didn't clarify exactly what sensitive areas are. So one of the next fights that we'll see as far as Supreme Court cases will likely be a case regarding what is a sensitive place when it comes to firearms. And that will be judged under the new standard that the Supreme Court said, which is you have to look at the law. You have to look at the Second Amendment text and the history and tradition regarding that text, and then look at the law. And if the law doesn't fit into the text, history, and tradition, then that law is unconstitutional. So right now you see in New York, they're trying to ban, carriage of firearms from places like, parks, public sidewalks, public transit, from taxis, from restaurants, from grocery stores, the presumption that if you're carrying somewhere, if you're a business, the presumption is that you are not allowed to carry there unless the business says explicitly that you can, which is an inversion of how that is typically applied in other states, where the assumption is you can carry firearms. You can, if you're legally able to carry firearms into that business, as long as you are not, as long as the business does not have some type of signage saying that you cannot do so. So they're going to be looking for very creative ways to stop people from exercising their Second Amendment rights. They're really trying. They're trying hard. They are, looking for every nook and cranny that they can fit into to deny that. Something else that they're doing is that they're just passing outright unconstitutional laws. So they're still, they're going from good cause to saying good moral character is what you have to show, which is basically just another way of saying good cause almost. So yeah, they followed the letter of the law, but they're not following the spirit of it. That'll be another Supreme Court battle. And these type of laws, they're going to have a massive effect on the African-American community, because there are many African-Americans today and growing that work actually in the gun industry. So whether they are instructors, whether they work at ranges, whether they work for gun manufacturers themselves, on the assembly line, in the corporate offices, whatever. You're seeing a growing presence of our community in these spaces. And the more they restrict the more they put these restrictions in place, that's going to affect those businesses. And when those businesses, if they're losing money, they're going to start, making layoffs, cutting back, and that can affect, the actual livelihood and lives of Black people in those industries. Other things they're doing, they're trying to get creative is some of the zoning laws. So, they just zone an area so that you can't have gun ranges in it. So that's going to put a damper on and reduce the amount of Second Amendment activity people can take part in, as far as learning about firearms in a safe manner and practicing those skills. Really just trying to kill the Second Amendment gun culture in the cradle. So that's something that we're going to see. Even with some of these bans that have been, if they want to put bans on magazines and things, even if all this stuff turns out to be struck down, the Supreme Court is unconstitutional, that takes years. It's not like tomorrow the Supreme Court's going to pick up any of these cases and then, next month they'll be adjudicated. I mean, the Supreme Court, like most federal institutions, are not very fast moving. There's different bureaucracies. So that case has to work its way up through all the different levels of court to get to the Supreme Court in the first place. Even if the court is, just chomping at the bit to take up that case, it still has to work its way up to that level, which, once again, that can take years. Well, in those years, once again, those businesses are affected. People are losing jobs. Those instructors, they're losing business because their students they don't have as many students. You have, those new Black-owned gun shops that are starting up. They're losing business because people aren't able to, buy firearms, or they're choosing not to because they can't get the capacity magazines that they feel they need to defend themselves, or they can't get the type of firearms that they want to defend themselves. Especially in a place like California, which has a handgun roster that says only certain types of handguns you can have that are deemed safe for use. But these handguns are handguns that haven't been produced, brand new, or rather the models haven't been produced in mass, since, the 1980s in some cases. And every year you have models that fall off that list because they're just not produced anymore. And even the handguns that are on that list, they don't meet California's own standard of what is a safe firearm. And then the firearms that they let their law enforcement have don't meet those standards either. So it's all types of contradictions and hypocrisy going on. So there's just so much, and that how these laws affect that, we really just don't look at. And that's the point. They don't want you to think about these things and really know this information, because once you start thinking about it, knowing about it, even if you decide at the end of the day that firearms aren't for you, you've now made, you've taken it from this kind of boogeyman thing to, okay, these are real people, real honest citizens that are owning these firearms, many of them that look like me. And do I want to have them lose their jobs? Do I want to have them feel less safe, take away their rights or infringe on their rights to be able to protect themselves and their families, when I know about the kind of difficult situations that they live in, because maybe I've lived in that situation, or I have family members that have or still live in those situations, right? So it's very, very complex, but they don't want to bring complexity to this issue, because complexity means you have to have honest, open discussion like we're having here. And once you have the honest and open discussion, you're not going to have so many people that are going to support these type of laws. So I'm going to put my soapbox away for a minute, let you guys get back to talking. I'm supposed to be facilitating, but, I have a passion for this just like you guys. So, I got to get my little 2 cents in there.
You good? If you don't mind, I'd like to say something just briefly, something I saw in the comments. There's 2 things in the comments that I saw that kind of caught my attention. One is a question that's asking, I'm going to read it verbatim. One of the things that we can do to protect our two-way rights is to vote for candidates that support two-way. With that said, many of those candidates are not necessarily aligned with the policies and platforms that align or support the Black community. How do we get to an intersection of the two? I think that's a fantastic question. But if a little bit further up in the comments, there was a statement from someone that said, this has always been a cultural fight. If you change the culture, the politics will follow. And I find that interesting as an answer to that later question, without really, putting 2 and 2 together like that, because when you look at the growth of Black gun ownership, particularly since 2020, and when you see how many new gun owners are Black people, and in particular Black women, there's always been this trope that's been said, well, as soon as Black people start getting guns, then they're going to start banning all the guns, right? And we're going to have gun control. Well, what we've seen is that Black people are getting guns in large number, and we've seen this progression of gun rights. And what that says to me is it's really emblematic of the statement that the guy made in the comments, that if the culture changes, the policies and the politics will change. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the advent or the growth, or dare I say reclamation, of the Black tradition of arms among Black people, and this drumbeat towards more freedom, more rights for folks, up to and including the right to keep and bear arms. One of the things I always tell people in the Black Bottom Gun Club and who I come across is that simply we're here to claim every right that our ancestors were denied, up to and including the right to keep and bear arms. And I think that question and that prior statement are really, really good examples of seeing the culture change despite the racist stereotype of Black people and being associated with criminality and firearms.
Excellent. Great comments there. And that's a perfect segue into our next question, which is, what can African American gun owners and those interested in gun ownership do to affect change in the more restrictive states? And I'm going to expand this, not just the more restrictive states. We can talk about it even in the less restrictive states, because as Chad pointed out when looking at those two comments that were in the chat, this is the cultural fight, one. In number two, you have politicians that, maybe they support gun rights, but they don't support a lot of other initiatives that would be good for the African American community. Or vice versa, you may have a politician that supports, several initiatives that are good for the African American community, but are very, very negative when it comes to gun rights for not just African Americans, but for anybody. So with that being the case, what does that look like for African American gun owners who are really trying to expand these rights, but still make sure that they are protecting all the other rights? Because what we don't want to do is trade one right, get one right, but then we trade off another one. That has far too often been what we have had to do politically. And that's just a zero-sum game. We never get anywhere, and we're always at a loss. I want to make sure, and I'm sure all of you want to make sure, is that we win, all of our rights, everything. Now, whether you choose to exercise a particular right or to what extent, that's your own individual personal choice. But we want to make sure that we have all of those rights available for us to exercise in the first place. So that being said, focusing on the Second Amendment, what does that look like for African Americans in not just restrictive states, but even in states that are very good on gun rights?
Well, let me add my little 2 cents here. I think one thing that politicians hate more than anything is losing. And the way to get their attention is at the polls, and let them know in the interim how you feel about a particular initiative or a movement that's going on in your community. They will listen to you very critically if their ownership or their position within the community is up for grabs in a voting situation. But if you don't let them know how you feel about a particular amendment, especially when it comes to guns, business is going to be as usual. They're going to ignore it, and they're going to say, well, most Black folks vote this way, so I'm not going to worry about that. But when they feel your presence collectively, and I'm going to focus on collectively, things happen. And I'll say again, they do not like losing at the polls, so they'll definitely take note of what you're saying, and they're going to definitely make sure that those concerns are addressed and making you feel comfortable as a collective. And Black folks are changing. Like, to Chad's point, we are starting a momentum within our community where more and more Black folks have guns. 6 years ago, Pew Research did a research on the number of Black families that have guns. It was like 24%. That same number has pivoted to about 53% right now. That's a huge swing, a dramatic swing. So that says a lot of Black people have guns now, and they're continuing to buy guns. Eventually, politically, in terms of the voting booth, that's going to catch up to the politicians where they have to take note. They can't collectively stay on one side of the street and say guns are bad. They have to understand that those same people that are voting for you have guns, and those are good folks. So you can't label us bad people because we have guns now. It is going to take time, but it is coming, and I can feel it because we're on the side of right. We have the Second Amendment, and it's the law. The Second Amendment is not a dead document. It's a living document to protect us. We just have to go out and make sure those politicians are reminded of that fact.
Absolutely. I would add to that too, in the realm of changing culture, where our dollars go, that makes a difference as well. Politicians don't like to lose, and companies don't like to lose money. Mm-hmm. And for a long time in this country, we all know that monetarily, the gun industry has supported certain politicians as well. And now we've shaken things up. Those gun manufacturers are looking and they're saying, wait a minute, the biggest demographic right now that's growing, Black women, that's who's buying our products. We need to also be careful about the people that are representing us. We need to be careful about where our lobbying dollars are going. We need to be careful to make sure that we're being represented in such a way that we're not going to lose our customer base. And so in addition to voting at the polls and in addition to making our voices heard, we also need to make sure that our dollars are speaking for us. again in those large numbers. And part of the way we do that is what Chad just mentioned, what we have been doing. Now we're getting trained, we're being vocal. We have organizations like Naga that are giving us a voice, and we're taking advantage of that and we're saying, listen, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, you have to deal with me. And so I think we need to keep that momentum going as a community and keep education at the center. That is absolutely pivotal, because the only way that we can counter this ideology that is just prevalent in our country, a Black person with a gun is a violent person. A Black person with a gun is, someone who's not responsible. The only way we can counter that is to show something different. And I think we're doing a tremendous job of that and need to continue. And then also we need to speak against those negative images that continue as well. We got to tell our kids, because you saw it on this television station doesn't mean that's the way we're supposed to act. That's not the way we're supposed to carry ourselves. Mm-hmm. All of those things matter. And as the companies begin to see that we are consumers, they're going to also aid us in that voice when it comes time to pick out our politicians.
Agreed.
So I have a little bit of an interesting take on this, because what we've seen historically is, to Doug's earlier point, is our rights have kind of been bartered and exchanged for some time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just on our side, whatever side we may vote on, right, as Black folks. And just historically, just keeping it a buck, Black people overwhelmingly vote Democrat, right? And I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with that one way or the other. How you choose to vote, how you choose to vote. But I think that on one end, we've bartered the Second Amendment for some of the other things that are important to us, right? And I understand that. On the other side of it, though, you have folks who vote opposite of us have bartered other things, right, in exchange for the Second Amendment. So they get the Second Amendment rights, but they barter away voting. They barter away education. They barter away the right to privacy, right? So what we see here is nothing short of hypocrisy. And I say that from the perspective of, if you can advocate for the Second Amendment but don't care about the 14th Amendment, or want to get rid of the 14th Amendment, which deals with birthright citizenship, or get rid of the 15th Amendment, which gives voting rights to all citizens regardless of race, color, previous condition of servitude, or in some cases, like I said, advocate against either and try to get rid of them, that's hypocrisy. If you're silent about the Sixth Amendment being disregarded in favor of garbage plea deals because you don't want to participate in jury duty, but you consistently scream my rights whenever a politician talks about gun control, that is hypocrisy. If you're one of those people who scream this all the time, and I hate it with my soul, but I get it, but who scream shall not be infringed as the limitation of your argument for the Second Amendment, if you're one of those types, but you're also perfectly fine with excessive fines and bail that run afoul of the Eighth Amendment, then that is hypocrisy. And I can go on and on with the litany of levels of hypocrisy, but the point is clear. If you isolate one right in a silo and fail to see the interconnectedness of all of those rights, then all of the rights are in jeopardy. And that goes for us too. So while we champion voting rights, which we should, and everybody should vote all the time, and while we champion education, which we should, because for so long the right to education was denied to us, we should also champion the idea that we ought to be secure in our persons and be able to protect ourselves, our family, and our community against any threat that's foreign or domestic against us, full stop. I don't believe that that's a radical idea whatsoever. And I don't believe that you have to adhere to one side or the other relative to a politician or a party, right? And again, historically, I vote primarily Democrat because for me, it's that 80-20 rule, right? However, I'm getting to the point, and I've gotten to the point where we have to kind of create those immovable or those hard issues that we will not budge on. For me, it's voting, it's education, and it's guns. Frederick Douglass said, a man's rights rest in three boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. We need to take hold to that and don't let it go, right? At the same time, we also need to make sure that we stick to Henry Lacy Clay's when he helped start the CBC, Congressional Black Caucus. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And I believe that we absolutely have to have the Second Amendment and the rights that it gives us, or well, not even the right that the Second Amendment gives, because those are natural rights, those are human rights, right? But we need to really grab a hold of that and take it and make sure that those are a part of our permanent interests as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great commentary by all. Just to piggyback off what everyone's brought up here, when it comes to our Second Amendment rights, and in particular, we're talking about it today in the context of the most recent Supreme Court ruling, as well as what we're going to get into in a little later, the new bipartisan gun law that was passed shortly thereafter. When we're talking about these rights, I know that, for many in our community, there's still that cultural piece of seeing guns as bad and those who have guns as being bad, because our experience a lot of times in many of our communities is those that have the firearms, treat us as less than, whether we're talking about your average street criminal out there, or far too often if we're talking about interactions with, officials of the state, our police force, which is supposed to be there to serve and protect us. In far too many of our communities, the way that the police represent themselves is as an occupying force, and we're the people that are supposed to be occupied, right? And that's just the God's honest truth. I'm not saying anything that any of you haven't had conversations about yourselves and your privacy, your own homes, or even when you're out and about with other folks. So we have to recognize that, but it's just really challenging when I run into individuals that they have that viewpoint of firearms are bad because of the experiences, which I completely understand, but then in the same breath will rail against the number of atrocities that have been perpetrated against our community, both in the present day and in the past, and where we can look at the fact that African Americans did not have access to firearms or the same access to firearms as the community that came to destroy them, and still think like that the gun is a problem, that we need to eliminate firearms or access to them. And that just doesn't make any sense for me, given the amount of both private and state sanctioned violence that our communities experience, why you would want to give up any type of arms. And particularly when it's a fact that those that are going to come against you are going to have access to the very same arms that, you may pass, support a law that's passed that they'll make sure that you don't have them. They'll make sure that you don't have that carry pistol. They'll make sure that you don't have that semi-automatic rifle. But those that are coming against you, they are not going to be under such restrictions. So, that's just a non-starter for me. And, it's just very challenging to work through. And I know a lot of that, as everybody said, that comes from that, just personal experience, but also just ignorance of just not knowing. You really, if you literally don't know anyone that has had access to a firearm that has been represented, portrayed in a positive light, be it you saw them in media or they were right in front of you in real life, yeah, you're not going to want to have any connection to it, because all you see it is harm that's come at you and come at your community. But all of us that are here, the National African American Gun Association, all the independent African American instructors and FFL owners, and those that work in the gun industry, is whether on the assembly line or in the corporate offices. I mean, we are those representatives when it comes to those firearms, and we have to make sure that we're doing our job of being good stewards and presenting that positively to our community, because that's going to get a change in that mindset and that culture, where we do feel empowered to then go talk to our politicians and make sure that our views are expressed. Now, not every politician is going to come, to the side of supporting our gun rights, along with all the other rights that are due to us. But we have to try, and we can't try and do that from a place of knowledge and place of good faith unless we have that knowledge first. And so that's the job of all of us here on this panel. That's the job of all of you in the chat, that, we need to be those positive representatives. We need to organize in our communities. We need to find those people that feel the same way as we do. And that we can really build like true partnerships with, to, talk to our politicians and say like, hey, look, I love what you're doing, all these other things, but we got to get right on gun rights. And here's why. Here's the actual nuanced and contextualized information about firearms to make that decision properly. And I think if you look at that information, you're going to have no choice but to support those rights.
Can I just add something just quickly, Doug, to that point? Because you said a lot there that I absolutely agree with, and making sure that we have a foundational common base of knowledge about firearms and the history that is absolutely critical. I was reading something not too long ago. It was an anthropological study of projectile weaponry, right? And when we look at projectile weaponry, that started in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Projection weaponry is the reason for the out of Africa migration. And so what we're seeing with firearms is a natural progression of that projectile weaponry in what we have today. And I think that part of the trick, I don't want to say part of the trick, but part of what it has to be is to make sure that folks understand that firearms are and have been a pro-social reality of the human experience, right? And when I say a pro-social reality of the human experience, what we're talking about is the use of firearms to defend and protect against violence that is visited upon communities and individuals, right? When you look at, if you were to think about it, the single period of time or the greatest event in American history for the advancement of freedoms and rights wasn't the movement of the 60s, but it was really the Civil War. And that was violent and it was bloody, right? But prior to that, what you had was Black abolitionists who were okay with using violence and who were okay with using firearms to get freedom because the idea of moral suasion was taking too long. And so you had instances like the Christiana Rebellion or the Christiana Resistance with William Parker when he killed Edward Gorsuch. That name may sound familiar to some folks. But when he killed Edward Gorsuch, when Edward Gorsuch and his men tried to go and quote unquote recapture the people who had escaped from him, and William Parker said, if you come up these stairs, you mine, right? And he created an entire brigade of folks in Christiana, Pennsylvania to fight off slave catchers, right? And this was one of the incidences that preceded the Civil War. So I think it's important that, and I think that Naga does a fantastic job of this, of getting our people a clear understanding of the history of the Black experience in America with the history of gun ownership and how that intersection has been, for better and for worse. Because not for nothing, there is a lot of trauma surrounding firearms in our community. A lot of that trauma surrounding firearms in our community is because of the lack of education about that history and about the tool itself. And so that's why I believe that Naga is probably the preeminent organization to making that turnaround for our folks.
Awesome. Excellent comments. So one thing I want to piggyback off of what Chad just talked about is dealing with that trauma that we see many of our community have experienced in regards to individuals that use guns irresponsibly and immorally, either against them as an individual or against members of their community. I want to go to Dr. Joy Allen for a second here, because I know she has a very, very deep history in dealing with individuals that have dealt with trauma, and not necessarily from guns, but, trauma is trauma, whether it's with a firearm or it's coming from another place, it's going to have those same negative effects on a person until they're able to have it dealt with. So can you just share with us a little bit of your experience today, Dr. Allen, because I think that would be beneficial for folks to hear.
Definitely. And I will say, you're right, trauma is trauma. And with a lot of people that I have encountered and counseled, whether that's because of domestic violence or an abusive home that they grew up in, whatever the case may be, one trend I've noticed is very clear. And that is still that when trauma occurs as related to firearms, it's treated very differently. And it's very clear that it's treated differently because of, again, that word culture and vernacular that goes around it. We always, in this country, for whatever reason, have a tendency to villainize the tool. We villainize the firearm, as opposed to what is actually going on with the person who has been the cause of the trauma, right? So if I talk to a young lady, for example, or a young man who's been a victim of domestic violence, we talk about how that's not their fault. And we talk about how the person who inflicted violence upon them is the person who's responsible. If we talk about someone who's been to war and they're dealing with PTSD, we talk about how those circumstances, around the war, and they've been thrown into this situation where they have no control, and we talk about how that has caused drama. But as soon as there is a firearm introduced, we have been almost programmed to think that it's the gun that's bad. And so I can say that in all of my counseling and preaching and whatever, I always get the question, how can you be a packing preacher? It doesn't go together. And what we have to understand is it goes back to not only the history of firearms in this country, but also, if I can put it this way, the history of brainwashing in this country, whether that is brainwashing behind economics, dare I say religion, the way we raise our families. I won't go there tonight, but there's a lot of conversation that has happened and a lot of practices throughout history that have caused us to villainize the very things that would make us victors. And if you are embedded in fear, then you can be starving. But if somebody tells you, I'm going to put some Kentucky Fried Chicken in front of your face, and you have not eaten for 7 days, but if I can convince you that that chicken will kill you, you will sit there and starve with a bucket of chicken in your face. And that is, in many ways, what we're dealing with. We've just been taught through television, through history, the gun is bad, instead of dealing with the person and understanding that a gun is simply a tool. No one who's ever been stabbed turns around and says, you know what? I don't want anybody else to have a knife. It just doesn't happen. And in our culture, we've got to begin to take ownership again of our history, every part of our history, and also take ownership of our rights and not be bashful about it. There's no reason to feel ashamed or to feel like, we have to do something special to exercise any rights that we have in this country. And so I know I'm getting on a little bit of a tangent, and I'm going to stop there, but it's a passion for me because I see it over and over and over again. The very things that we have written into the law to help to protect us, we've almost been brainwashed to villainize them, which causes us to kind of keep ourselves in that slave type of position. And that's something I'm really passionate about. We've got to get out of that mindset.
Can I say something real quick, Doug?
Go ahead.
And great comments, Chad and Joy. You guys have been on point, as Doug as well. One of the hardest things you can do with someone that's a slave is to talk to them and they don't realize they're a slave. And with our community, we have been socialized, trained, as Joy just indicated, fear put into our souls. If you see a gun, anyone that has a gun is a bad thing. To me, the gun is the missing link. Look at every community in the world, for that matter, especially here in the U.S., that is strong, secure, and safe. Firearms is in the backdrop. You know darn well if you go in this particular neighborhood and you start some mess, they got something for you because everyone over there has guns or they have security, which has access to guns. So we have to understand how we've been drilled in the head and let everyone know that, we have to change that mindset, to Joy's point. And it's a very, very long and at times frustrating process. But guns is the missing link. We need to understand that guns can liberate us, and not only liberate us, it can give us the freedom that we need to be successful in this country.
Awesome. Great comments by everyone. All right. So we've been talking for close to an hour now. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to a brief intermission. When we come back, we've got a few more questions for the panelists, and we're also going to take some more questions from the chat. So I've been trying to keep up and keep the questions listed, but if you have any questions you haven't asked, go ahead, start putting those in the chat, and we will answer some of those when we come back from the intermission. So stay tuned with us right here.
Hi, everyone.
This is Philip Smith,
President and founder
of the National African Gun Association.
I'd like to announce today we are going to be having our national convention July 28th, 29th, and 30th of 2023 at the Georgia International Convention Center. I want you and all of your friends to be there with me. Hi, everyone. This is Philip Smith, President and founder of the National African Gun Association. I'd like to announce to you today we are going to be having our national convention July 28th, 29th, and 30th of 2023 at the Georgia International Convention Center. I want you and all of your friends to be there with me.
All right, and we're back. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're going to start off. We'll start off with a few questions from the audience first. So I've gotten a bunch of them down. Once again, guys, if you have questions, go ahead, put them in the comments. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can tonight. Also, if you've not already done so, please like, share, subscribe to the channel. Make sure we can spread this information to everyone that has even the slightest bit of interest in it. All right, so the first question, someone's asking, with the change that came from the court, does it mean flying with my firearm? Does it mean when I fly my firearm and have a layover in New York, do I still have to worry about getting arrested? I would say that the answer to that is currently yes, due to the New York not really having conceded to the Supreme Court ruling, so to speak. So I would absolutely positively be careful of that and try to avoid that if at all possible, because we do not want anybody, especially good, upstanding citizens like yourself, getting put in jail over some really silly bureaucracy. So that was a good question. Next question. It says, I am fully licensed, have a FOID and a CCL, and I live in East Central Illinois. I travel to Chicago frequently to see family. Because of the rules in Chicago regarding firearms, I'm reluctant to take any firearms up north. What can I do and how should I do it? Another good question. So I am not fully versed on the ins and outs of all the Chicago firearm laws. I know that they are very restrictive. However, a great resource for information on that would be our Chicago area chapter, the 761st Gun Club. That's our Chicago area Naga chapter. So I would absolutely suggest that you read out to them. They can put you on game, so to speak, as far as what you should and should not do, what you can and cannot do in those in the Chicago area regarding firearms. So another great question. Next question, it says, do you think the effort on education of the culture of guns is better focused on the non-gun owners out there or the politicians who continue to use gun owners' rights as a political weapon? So I'm going to turn this one over to the panel. Let's start off with Phil there. Hey, Phil, you're on mute.
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Am I there?
Yep.
Okay. The question was, do you think effort on education of the culture of guns is better focused on the non-gun owners out there or the politicians? I think we should focus on the people always, every time. I think that's where the best use of our money should go. Politicians, I'm not going to say they're all bad folks, but they have a different agenda. And at times when you talk to them, they'll tell you what you want to hear as opposed to what's really going on and what you really need. So I say my money is best suited to focus on our folks. And I think we'll get the best ROI on that based on that conversation.
All right. Anyone else on the panel?
I definitely agree. I'll just say this quickly. I think another mindset change that we really need to adopt is to remember that our politicians are our representatives. They are supposed to represent us. They work for us, not the other way around. And I think a lot of times in our community, I don't know if it's intimidation because of history, or maybe sometimes a misunderstanding of how this thing works, but they represent us. And we've got to own that and hold them accountable, right? We are here and we're not going anywhere. We have a voice and they are supposed to represent that voice for us. So I absolutely agree. We as people need to be educated. We need to continue to educate within our communities. And part of that education needs to be, I'm not going to ask, I'm going to demand. You are doing a job. You work for me. And I'm going to demand that you represent me accurately as a collective. And if you're not going to do that, then we're going to unseat you.
Absolutely. Remember, voting is an exchange, not a gift.
Exchange, not a gift.
Voting is an exchange, not a gift. Give nothing away for free to these politicians. They earn everything. Just like you go in a restaurant and you want that steak and you got to give them cold hard cash for it. You know, if you gave them cash and then they bring you a burger, you're like, that's not what I asked for, right? You would not be happy with that. So why are we happy with when we give our vote to a politician and they don't give us what we asked for, right? We need to make demands on them and say like, hey, this is what we want. And if they don't serve it, then we've got to find somebody else, no matter how long that may take. So vote is an exchange, not a gift.
I like that. I like that.
Doug, you took what I was gonna say because you know, but you and I, we right here, so you know I was gonna go there anyway. Yeah, to Doug's point and to Joy's point and Phil's point, voting is an exchange. It's not charity. We can't continue to give our votes away for nothing in return. And really more to that question, though, to answer that question a little bit more, succinctly as best I can anyway. Focus on, as Phil said, focus on the people. Because our right to defend ourselves should not be a partisan issue, right? Regardless of who makes it a partisan issue, because both the left and the right make it a partisan issue. You have to have the intestinal fortitude to say, nah, I'm not going for that level of division that you're trying to put on me for this thing that is mine. As a result of being born a human being in God's universe, right? Or if you don't believe in God or the universe or whatever the case is, right? But that is an inherent human right, and how you choose to exercise that right to defend yourself and your loved ones is literally inalienable. It's a natural reaction. So focus on the people and don't focus on the politicians.
Preach. I like that.
Excellent. All right, we're going to take a couple more questions from the chat, and then we'll get back into our main line of questions. So this question, I know it's been asked for a couple of times, so I want to make sure that we get it addressed. The question is, so is Naga going to start a litigation area? And I think that was in regards to, we're talking about lawsuits being filed in some of these states against some of the restrictive laws that are, and some just downright unconstitutional laws that are being put forth in a number of these states. So would you like to chime in on that, Phil?
Yeah, obviously, I would love to fight every fight that's coming out there that's affecting our community. I think that's what we all have in our heart. But it's a money thing. Do we have the finances to go out and literally litigate, 500 cases or 1,000 cases across the country? We don't have that bandwidth right now, just to be quite honest with everyone here on the panel and listening to me. But obviously, we're going in that direction. How it's going to end up looking, I don't know, but we certainly need to keep that definitely on the burner, not the back burner, but on the burner.
I would say to that point, for those who asked that question, if you look at some of the briefs that have been written for some of these Supreme Court cases, Naga has submitted some of those briefs, including the Bruin case. In fact, one of the there's a statement in there by Justice Clarence Thomas where he cites something that the brief submitted by Naga says in the ruling, in the majority opinion. So while we're not, engaging like some of the other organizations, acronym organizations, we are engaging on behalf of the rights of our folks, and we're doing so in a way that is historically accurate for our folks in these spaces.
Thank you. And just to give folks a little background, so when Chad is referring to a briefs, he's talking about amicus briefs, which layman's terms, they're basically written statements by subject matter experts and individuals that have a vested interest in that particular ruling. So typically they'll come from lawyers, they'll come from activist groups that are working on that particular issue. They may come from some type of university level educator that has a particular specialty on that issue. And so these are submitted to the Supreme Court to help to inform them on that particular issue, because, Supreme Court justice, they go through law school, they are lawyers, they're judges. But if anyone knows anything about law is a very, very, very broad area. And so they may specialize in certain areas, but not in others. So amicus briefs are a way for them to get subject matter expertise information on that particular ruling. And certainly, because people are submitting for and against, there are people that are, they have vested interests on the ruling going one way or the other. So the justices are taking that information and trying to separate out some of the, slant that may be in it versus like the actual legitimate information, and then try to make their ruling that way. So Naga has submitted several amicus briefs to the Supreme Court on a number of Second Amendment cases since we were founded in 2015. And we did actually do a story in Caliber magazine in the first issue where we talked about those briefs. We actually had the retired lawyer that works as our legal counsel for the organization. We interviewed her in the magazine. So if you don't have your copy, go ahead and check that out. The article is also on the Caliber magazine website as well. So you can get some information. Oh, and we did post up the amicus briefs there as well. So if you want to actually read the text of those, you can find that on the website. So that was a very good question. Very good question. And lastly, I can't leave this out. So since this is something that we do have interest in as far as having a litigation arm where we can file these cases, if you know anyone that is a lawyer that's interested in that type of work, if you know anyone that is going to school to be a lawyer that's interested in that type of work, please refer them to us. You can send the email directly to myself, vp@naga.co. That's vp@naaga.co. Send me their contact information and we can get the conversation started, because that is something that we've had many internal conversation about wanting to be much more involved in, along with being able to offer some other legal resources to the community. So if you know anyone that has that expertise, that works in those fields and is interested, please refer them to us. All right. So we're going to get back into the main line of questioning so we can finish up tonight, make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. So we've got 2 more big questions to tackle, and then we'll take a few more questions from the audience, and that'll close us out for the night. So the first of the 2 remaining questions, we've talked about the SCOTUS ruling. Now we're going to talk about the new Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So the first question is, are there any positive portions of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act? And if so, what are they? And I asked this question because there was a lot in that particular bill, and I think that there really was some good things and some really bad things in there. And I think there's been a lot of coverage of all of the bad stuff in there, and rightfully so. But I think we need to be able to, as always, be able to look at things through nuance and properly contextualize them and what they are. So I'm going to throw that first question out there just to anyone on the panel.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll jump in. There were some things that I liked about the bill, and I'll say this: I at least understood the intent. I'll put it that way. I applaud the intent and appreciate some of the funding that's been set aside for mental health, for suicide prevention, and acknowledging that those are areas where we can actually make a difference. I like the language around it because it also, in my opinion at least, confirms that the enemy is not the gun. And I think that's a political temperature that has been set. So I do like that the bill tried to, or at least in my opinion, focused a little bit away from that. I do think that was a good thing. Also, I like the efforts that are in the bill in regard to schools and making sure that there's some funding for school security that's set aside. So a lot of the funding, and there's quite a chunk of change involved. I can say that I'm in favor of where some of that is going. I'll try not to get to the negative, but of course, I'm curious to see how this actually pans out in the real world, so to speak. But I do appreciate the intent.
Oh, we're going to talk about the negative too, but I'm trying to start it off on the good note.
So
those are the things I think.
I think that to Dr. Joy's point, there are some really good aspects of it. I'll say that I know maybe some people are not fond of it, but I do appreciate the community violence intervention piece because what that does is provide funding to local community groups to intercept or intersect with people before violence becomes the end result of their conditions, right, that they live in. Because what we got to understand is that the way that violence is expressed through firearms is a downstream result of an upstream problem. And so when I say it's a downstream result of an upstream problem, the upstream stuff is all ecological. And when I say ecological, I'm talking about socio-political, socio-economic, socio-educational, and really the built physical environment, right? And so with the community violence intervention component, by providing funding to grassroots organizations that actually do the work in communities, I think that's going to be hugely beneficial because it begins to tackle some of the root causes of violence that becomes expressed at the end of a barrel of a firearm. I do think that to Dr. Joy's point, the intent of strengthening or kind of breaking up those loopholes around domestic violence, I agree with the intent. It still remains to be seen what the execution of that is going to look like. But if we want to talk about, the domestic violence piece about it, I think it's important that there's a segment of the population that has a little bit higher degree of instances of domestic violence than other segments of the population, and that's law enforcement. But we're not talking about restricting access for police who have these types of problems in their own homes. We're looking at it from a top-down perspective onto the civilian population. And I think if we really want to get to some of these root causes of things, we've got to look at all demographics, all segments of populations. Whether you're law enforcement, whether you're a civilian, whether you're a college professor, whether you're somebody working at Walmart, right? It shouldn't be bifurcated or stratified along the lines of what your career or profession is. And so, like I said, I get the intent of it. The execution piece, we'll see what happens. on the domestic violence front and some of the others. But I am a fan of the community violence intervention piece. Shout out to Live Free Detroit and Force Detroit. They're a fantastic group of folks that the Black Bottom Gun Club works with in the city of Detroit to kind of do some of that work. And shout out to the People's Action as well. They're a part of that coalition, and they're doing some amazing things, man. So yeah, shout out to all those folks that's really doing the work with boots on the ground.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. I think on the initial first blush, to Joy's point, the intent is admirable, but my fear is how is that going to be implemented? How is it going to be executed? My biggest fear, and I think we talked about this in our last town hall, my fear is that some of this stuff will be weaponized against the Black community, or an excuse to walk to someone's house and take his or her guns. I think the starting conversation is with the mental health. I think that's a good starting point. But then again, the devil's in the details. How is that going to be really implemented? And that's a very, very vague area. It can go a million ways, in a million different directions based on who's looking at that information and how that's going to be implemented for that particular state. If you have a good person that's trying to do the right thing, then yeah, it might be a good thing. But also if you have some people that have various devious, motives, it can be just a total weapon that can be used to oppress the Black community more than we're already being oppressed. So it just depends on how it's going to play out. And I guess it's kind of a wait and see type of thing, unfortunately. But I'm a little more skeptical as opposed to being optimistic right now.
All right, great commentary. So I'll round it out. I also agree. I think that it was good to have the funding for the mental health piece, as well as some of the violence intervention. But one of the downsides as we go into the negatives, I'm going to kick this off. What I really wish that they had it, and I wouldn't even say this bill because I don't think it really would have made it into this bill. I think this should be its own separate bill. Would be a combination of the funding of the violence intervention with fun, and combine that with funding for threat assessment and identification. Because there will be those that can be intervened, that are on that path of violence, that can be helped and can be turned away from such actions. And I think that's going to be most individuals. You catch them early when you see that they are experiencing those conditions and things that are putting them on that path and exhibiting that behavior. And we get them the type of treatment, the type of counseling that can get them back on the right path and make sure they become and stay a valued member of society. But then there are those that, they've already committed to that path, or you just can't change them. And that goes with like being able to identify them and being able to ensure that now you've got the law enforcement piece involved where, they have to be intervened by that portion of our government institutions. So I really hate that you don't see those two pieces together, because I think it's very important to have that piece of being able to intervene in a non-law enforcement way, because I think most individuals, you can kind of turn off those violent paths ultimately. Because I think it's just human nature that, for folks, if they're close to someone that is exhibiting signs that they might commit, one of these heinous crimes. And let's be clear, like this bill is specifically looking to try to stop the type of active shooting situations that we've seen in this country. Mm-hmm. Even if someone thinks that that person is on that path or exhibiting that behavior, it's just human nature that you don't want to think that about that person. You don't really want to believe that that's what they are, doing. You don't want to believe that that's what they intend. And even if you do, at the end of the day, you still don't want to see them go to jail and get locked up. And that's just a function of how everyone knows that how the criminal justice system treats those that aren't deemed as beneficial to society. And it's not very pleasant. So, a lot of people, they don't want to put their someone that they know and, sometimes that they love into that type of system. And let's be clear, when we're talking about the type of incidents that we've seen, it's no secret if we look at who's committing them, the majority of those people are not African Americans. They are not coming from our community, right? We've got to be honest about that. And that's not to say that we've never had individuals from our kid that have committed those type of horrible crimes, but that's not something that whatever's happening out there, it's happening to more so, it seems, in particular communities versus others. It doesn't seem to be what's happening now in our community. Now, in our community, we've got a very different form of violence perpetrated with firearms that happens. And that gets back to more of a lot of those socioeconomic, socio-political, socio-educational conditions and ecological conditions that Chad was referring to earlier. So we have to make sure we're not conflating the two problems because often, and you'll see as people will play around with some of the statistics when they talk about quote unquote mass shootings versus active shootings. And I said active shootings very specifically because it's defined one way and mass shootings defined another way. And you'll see some of those numbers cooked where mass shootings are, looking at domestic violence incidents where you had more than 2 or 3 people that were shot, or you have gang violence as more than 2 or 3 people shot. And as tragic as both of those type of incidents are, and this is not to downplay them or the trauma that they cause, the harm that they cause to people, but that's a very different phenomenon from a person that just decides to pick up a firearm and shoot and kill people that they have, that just random people that they don't know. That's a very different phenomenon than criminal gang violence and domestic violence. Those have very different causes, very different environments create those things. And a lot of times you'll see those that are pushing gun control laws are really conflating definitions, talking about, homicides versus gun deaths. Gun deaths can include suicides, which, can be anywhere from half to 2/3 of any type of death where the tool used to inflict it was a firearm. But that's not the same as that's not the same as homicides or even the type of victimization we see from active shooters. So once again, I'm gonna get off my soapbox for a second. I know this is for the panel, so I'm gonna step back and let the panel chime in on this. So to refocus us, we're talking about some of that negative parts of that bipartisan gun bill that passed.
Mm-hmm.
So just anyone on the panel.
Chad, you're speaking, but you're on mute.
Yeah.
My bad. So first and foremost, I do believe that we have to have a great compassion for the victims of these acts of terrorism, whether it's terrorism in our communities with kids being killed due to gang violence or street violence, or whether it's a parent of a child who was killed in the school and police officers did nothing to stop the carnage. We have to exercise a great deal of compassion for all the victims and the victims' families of acts of violence. And I won't say that there is a justifiable reason or excuse for those things to have occurred. I would caution us ask us to exercise caution about prescribing quote unquote mental illness as the reason for some of these heinous acts of violence, particularly mass shootings or active shootings, whatever definition you want to use. Because overwhelmingly, people who have diagnosed mental conditions don't commit these types of acts of violence, number one. And number two, these acts of violence that we see in the news, that make the news, like the mass shootings or what have you, or active shootings that take a lot of lives, they're a fraction of the amount of overall gun deaths in the country. To Doug's point, you'll see that anywhere from half to 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicides. So we have to be very, very careful about what we want to bring about as the cause of these acts of violence, because what we're doing in essence is saying that the people who are creating this havoc are mentally ill, and then we begin to look at those who have mental conditions and equate the two. When,
Correct.
to Doug's point again, you see the folks like the shooter in Buffalo, right? He wrote racist stuff on his firearms. He was very intentional about what he was doing. There was nothing mentally ill about that. That was all intent. That was a choice that he was making to go and attack black folks in a grocery store. That was a choice that 19-year-old decided to go into that school and kill those children. So yeah, we have to be careful about prescribing, mental illness to these folks. And to that point, one of the negative components of this Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is providing additional funding to states if they implement red flag laws. The question I have with that is, how do we implement if we believe as a society overall, or if folks believe as a society that these acts of violence are a result of mental illness, how do we implement red flag laws when we have a poor mental health infrastructure to begin with? If the red flag laws are designed to kind of counteract this quote unquote mental illness phenomenon and the manufactured association of that with these mass shootings, but we don't have the infrastructure in place to support the mental illness conditions that people may be dealing with, how do we reconcile those two? And that's not even touching on the fact that it abdicates due process under the law. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Phil, or the good doctor?
Joy, you go first.
Chad and I discussed this a little bit before, and I agree with everything that he said. I'm really, really concerned about providing additional funding to states so that they will implement red flag laws and programs that could potentially label children. So I was sharing before we got on the live, I grew up in the 70s. And I remember when there was a time in public schools where it became a trend. If you were a young male, if you were red, black, or brown, and you had any iota or inkling of a behavioral problem as deducted by a teacher, then you were labeled ADHD and put on Ritalin. And then we found out later that there were side effects to Ritalin. And some of us remember when literally at 75, 80% of young Black men at that time, boys in school, were labeled ADHD. And then we found out later that that was a false label. So I'm always a little bit hesitant when we are funding the labeling of people, knowing that those labels are subjective. And while we're saying, again, to Chad's point, that we're going to go after, troubles with mental illness, we don't have the infrastructure in the schools or in the states to properly diagnose that. And so we're going to end up with false labels that are, again, subjective, that are, again, going to sort of put people in buckets that they're going to have a very difficult time climbing out of. That's definitely one of my concerns. Some of my other concerns are around the domestic violence. While I understand, again, the intent is to close a loophole with that piece as well as the straw purchase piece, I'm concerned about how that's going to be enforced? What is it going to look like? So I think a lot of my trepidation is just, I don't understand how we can do this in a way that's going to be fair to all. It's very difficult for me to see it being executed in a way that's not going to inconvenience more people who have already been inconvenienced in terms of their rights already.
I can go? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. I think they're looking for a silver bullet, and there's no silver bullet that solves everything. It's impossible. I mean, we can try and try and try, but these are so nuanced, very sophisticated, complicated issues that we're trying to tackle under one umbrella, it's almost impossible. I am very fearful of the red flag laws. I think that's just an accident waiting to happen for Black folks around this country. Because what they're saying is that not anything, but if you see someone that exhibits behavior that is possibly dangerous to you or your family or to your neighborhood, you should report that. And when that happens, you kick in a process that's not going to give Black folks the benefit of the doubt. It just will not. And I'll give everyone an example. I've used an example before, and I'll use it again because I think it hits home the possibilities which aren't good for Black folks. Just imagine you come out one evening and you see your couple across the street, your neighbors, having a horrible argument. And they're screaming and hollering. It could be me. I'm yelling at my wife, and I take something, I throw it and hit the back of the car, and I'm screaming and hollering. And my neighbor runs into the house and says, I think Philip is exhibiting crazy behavior. But lo and behold, my wife and I are just having a very heated discussion like many couples do. Meanwhile, the police are called. The police come and question me. By that time, my wife and I, we've made up. We're sitting down at home. And there's no problem. It's an issue, water under the bridge. But now the wheels have began turning where you have a witness saying Philip acted crazy. So we have to investigate it. So what happens in the meantime, they petition the judge. They come and knock on my door. They take my rifles, my pistols, whatever, my ammunition, everything is out. Now I have to go through a very expensive process and a lengthy process to get my guns and my ammo back. That's a good scenario. The bad scenario might be somebody banging the door down and shooting an unarmed Black man because they think he's a threat to the community. The red flag laws are a danger, and I'm just not an advocate of them in any way, shape, or form based on how they've been presented. The idea, I get it. I got babies too. I don't want my children out there possibly getting shot by someone who's crazy. But there has to be a structured process all the way through from A to Z that's going to enable folks to keep their Second Amendment rights and at the same time balance safety within the community. But the red flag laws, that's the one thing that really scares me in this whole bipartisan Safer Communities Act that is really, really troublesome, because I know how my neighborhood used to look, which was an all Black neighborhood. And when police came through, they were not coming through to talk to us kindly. They were there to enforce the law, however they needed to do that. And I just think the red flag laws is going to be just another keg in the wheel that's going to be very, very harmful for the Black community.
One thing that I want to make sure we touch on about the red flag laws, and while all of you are talking, this kind of brought this to mind. I was thinking, if you remember, gosh, I guess it's been 3 years now. COVID kind of wiped out 2 years, so my remembering the time is gonna be a loss. But I think it was about 3 years back now. The FBI created a term, what they called the quote unquote Black identity extremists. And when you looked at that description, essentially, really any Black person that is loud and vocal about saying that Black people deserve their rights and deserve the same rights and privileges as any other person in this country could be labeled as a Black identity extremist. Yeah. Okay, so you have that as a label that can be applied. So, somebody, either they don't like you, they don't like what you're saying, or they really believe that that's actually a danger or a threat to America. Because and there's a problem with you, like if you think that Black people having all the rights and privileges of everyone else in the country is a threat to America, like, okay, you and I have two very different visions of America, but that's a whole nother conversation. But anyways, you get this label applied to you. That sounds right for like some red flagging. So like, okay, we've got a BIE, a Black identity extremist, danger, threat to the community. We need to send some guys with guns and flak vests and plate carrier shields to come kick down your door in the middle of the night and essentially abduct you, right? And take your guns too. But that just seems all too right. And I mean, and some people say like, okay, maybe it's like there's no way that could happen. It's like, I don't know if you've really read the history of this country to think that that's not something that could absolutely happen to Black people, significant numbers of Black people for that measure. The second thing I want to draw attention to is, so in this new bill, they have something they want to call enhanced background checks of 18 to 20-year-olds when it comes to purchasing of semi-automatic firearms. And like many of these laws on the face of it, they don't sound all that awful, but when you really start digging into the details and playing out what that looks like, it really becomes a horrible situation. So let's go back and look at the African American community. We already know that. So wait, let me talk about the first piece. So what they're doing with these enhanced background checks is they're looking at juvenile records of individuals that are wanting to purchase a semi-automatic firearm. And they're looking at those juvenile records to see, if there was anything, some kind of dangerous, really, violent crime that they were convicted of as a juvenile. So we already know that Black boys are disproportionately get juvenile records. Like that's just, there's no debating that. It's the fact. So we already have Black boys disproportionately getting these juvenile records. And we know that Black men and boys together are disproportionately imprisoned. 1 in 3 Black men and boys will serve jail time in their lifetime. That's a huge number, right? So if we already have them they're disproportionately targeted, get these juvenile records, then it would be fair to assert that that Black boys will be disproportionately denied their rights to get, common self-defense technology. And then the second piece of this is they say it's enhanced background check between 18 to 20 years old. Well, at what point do those records fall off? Because if we already have them in the system, if they turn 21 and just the switch is flipped and it doesn't apply anymore, that hasn't really been clarified, right? And typically when it comes to government and bureaucracy, it's a lot harder to claw back things that you give the government access to than to deny them access to it in the first place. So kind of once it's out there, it's really hard to pull that back. And so they really haven't explained how that process is going to apply, because you could have all right, kid gets, some type of juvenile assault record when he is 16. All right, he straightens up. He's good, goes to 18 to 20. He's trying to buy. Oh, no, you're denied because of that record. Okay, it goes to 21. He's still denied by it. So we've essentially turned that into a felony, but not a felony, right? And denied this person their rights, even though they're a good, upstanding citizen. And they did what, a lot of boys, got into a fight when he was a kid. He just unfortunately had the misfortune of having the police called on him and getting an arrest record and a conviction out of it, right? Even though nobody died and no one was horribly maimed. So, these are things that I think about when I see these laws, because, it doesn't even take, racist intent to get racist outcomes with this type of law. It only takes really lazy writing on the part of lawmakers to get these outcomes. When you have lazy, badly written law, either out of ignorance, either out of, those writing it didn't really want to do the work to do it the right way, or those that are writing it had a, malice in their heart of wanting to target a particular group of people, you're going to see unfair application, treatment, and outcomes from that law. And we have far too many laws that look like that. The most glaring example of this type of laws in this country are drug laws. They're not written in a way that says, yes, we will lock up predominantly Black people, but how they're operated, that's exactly what happens. And so I just kind of see this is, being that it was pushed, by people that probably voted for some of these drug laws in the first place, I guess I really shouldn't be surprised that it could potentially have that kind of outcome, but I see it as very, very problematic, very problematic.
Doug, if I could add on to that quickly, I agree with everything you said, and I'm just going to step back and be a little bit more personal, to be honest with you. I just have a fundamental issue with this country saying an 18-year-old is an adult enough to go to war. An 18-year-old is adult enough to vote. And I'll be honest, I'm a mother of an 18-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son. When my son turned 18 and when my daughter turned 18, their physicians said to me, I'm paying the bill, I'm taking them to the doctor. Their physician said to me, they are now adults. You have to get their permission to see their medical records. When you go into the school, if you disagree with something your child is doing, they will protect that child, but hold you accountable as the parent. So I just have a fundamental issue in this country of us feeling like we can pick and choose when someone is an adult. I'm just going to keep it that simple. I know it's not deep, but I really do. That boggles my mind because
Preach.
you are still taking away the right of a citizen. At 18 years old, you are a full-blooded, full-blown adult citizen. And so now what they are trying to do under the guise of, like Philip said, trying to come up with some silver bullet that doesn't exist, essentially at base level, we're now denying the rights of people, of citizens between the ages of 18 and 21, based on something a mistake they might have made as a child. I thank God there was no TikTok, Instagram, all that crap when I was a kid, because I would probably have a record too. but we're now holding them accountable for something that took place maybe in middle school. You couldn't be held accountable in court because you weren't an adult. So now we're saying as soon as you become an adult, you're required to pay for the things that you did as a child, even though we're going to even restrict your parents from being able to help you out with it. It doesn't make sense to me. And I know, again, that's probably not the best answer, but I see so many double, triple, quadruple standards there that I just don't like.
I mean, that's a real answer. And I'm sure we have many people that are watching this now and people that will watch this later that have, the same sentiments. We try to keep it very honest here, very open, because we are, we're here for the community. This work that we do in this organization is a labor of love. And the work that we do outside the organization, as you've heard from many of our panelists, they're involved not just here with giving back to the community, but in many other ways. So we try to be very grounded and down to earth and really trying to make sure that you guys understand how critical these issues are to you. Once again, you can make up your own decision of how you're going to act on that information, but we want to make sure that you have the right information. And by right, I mean you have factual information that is properly nuanced and contextualized, and then filtered through that lens of the African-American experience, right? So, I mean, really, really great comments by everybody. Really appreciate it. The thing we're going to do now, we're going to answer a few more questions from the audience. So once again, folks out there, if you have some questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We're going to try to pull them up, answer as many as we can before we get out of here. So I'm going to go over to a few more that we had from last time we didn't get to. And then I'll pull up the additional ones that are coming up in the chat. So the next question, this one is similar to the one about the litigation earlier. But this question is Naga going to establish a PAC to promote our interests?
It's coming. Everybody know it's coming. I can't say officially, but I've had conversations with multiple times with Doug, Chad, 1,000 other folks. It's something that's got to come at some point in some way. The conversation, the energy, the concern, and quite honestly, look at some of the comments we're having tonight from folks all across the country. They really want to have a conversation or a place to go to talk about these legal issues, these social issues that are affecting our community. So it's got to come. I don't know the exact date, but it's coming, and it's coming, I would say, quicker as opposed to longer.
All right. Thanks for that, Phil. The next question that we have here is asking, will Naga start to support pro-2A candidates or begin to field our own candidates?
You gonna hand that one, Doug? Chad?
I'll jump in on that one. So
step back on that one.
So the official stance of NAGA, National African American Gun Association, is that we are not affiliated with any political party. We are not pro-Democrat. We're not pro-Republican. We're not liberal. We're not conservative. We have people from both sides of the political spectrum that are members of our organization. So we do not promote any particular party. Also, we do not promote any particular candidates because we believe in policy. Policy is what people should support, and policy can be promoted by candidates from any party. So what we like to do here is make sure that we talk about the policies, regarding Second Amendment rights, how they affect us as African Americans, and then talk about which ones are, good for our community, which ones are not so good for our community. And then once we put that information out there, we let you decide. Is the decision that, whether that decision is you're voting for one candidate or another, or whether that decision is, I am going to take this information and I'm going to advocate for it and make sure that my candidate of choice or party of choice knows that I support this and that my community support this and that they need to get on board with this particular policy. I think that's how we need to be as a community, as all the panelists have said in more or less throughout this this cast tonight. We have to make sure that we are supporting policy that is good for us, regardless of where it's, which candidate is pushing it. Doesn't mean that you necessarily vote for a candidate that pushes that policy, because once again, we talked about that horse trading of our rights that candidates will do from both sides of the political spectrum, right? But we have to make sure that we're advocating those policies and make sure that there is, for those that don't support them, we got to make sure that we exact a cost on them. And that cost has to be that they don't get our support in that next election unless they do come around. And not just on gun rights, but on this is for any issue that you have a passion for and that you think is important to your community, right? This is not exclusive to the Second Amendment, right? This is how it should be on any and all issues that we find important to ourselves and important to our community. So once again, we support policies. We do not support candidates. We do not support parties. We do not promote candidates. We do not promote parties. Because far too often, those personalities can really get in the way of looking at the policy itself. We have to be very sober-minded when it comes to that policy and when it comes to politics in general. Because once again, voting is an exchange. It's not a gift, right? We want to make sure that those politicians earn our vote every step of the way, and they earn our support. Not just in the immediate election time, but after they've gotten to office, that they're doing what we put them there to do. And if they won't do it, we got to get them out. If they can't, and it's because of something that, we can help them to do it, then we need to give that support to make sure that they can. So that's the answer to that one. All right, next question. It says, more gun shops around the country, FFLs, are vital, in my opinion. These new laws challenge new gun shops and create a barrier to starting new FFLs. Any comments on this particular facet?
Are they saying that make sure I understand the question correctly, more gun shops around the country is vital? I think it's very vital that we have Black-owned gun shops. That's, I think, first and foremost needs to be promoted within our own community. That's a first step. There's a lot of gun shops out there now, but a lot of those gun shops don't necessarily have or embrace us coming into their store. It's somewhat of a confrontational, if not, how can I say this, negative experience for Black folks, and they do that by intention. So if the question they're asking, do we need more FFLs that are African-American? Absolutely. We have too few right now. We need a lot more, and we need a lot more women that are FFLs that own stores, that own gun ranges, that go out there and provide a warm, welcoming environment for Black folks when you come to the door, where you feel like, you know what, my hard-earned dollar is going to be welcomed here, and I'm going to get treated in a certain manner that I deserve. So that's how I'm taking the question. But yes, we need more Black-owned gun stores, gun ranges, property that we can go to and train, where we're comfortable and people respect us for who and what we are.
Excellent comments. Let's see. I'm trying to read over the question too. I'm trying to do double duty of reading the chat and putting questions up, so you have to forgive me here. Trying to tax my brain late in the evening here. So the question about the laws challenging the gun shops and creating barriers. Yeah, they do create barriers, and that I believe that's very purposeful. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's a segment of the population that believes that guns equal violence, the guns equal crime, and for that segment that believes that, the only answer to the problem of people being hurt by firearms is to get rid of them. And they're going to use any and all means to do that. They're getting very creative because, with the new Supreme Court decision that kind of kicked out one of the legal ways that they could do so, but they're going to turn to every other way, whether it is, we talked about, zoning, where they're just going to zone out areas and say, like, you can't have an FFL in this area, particularly the home-based FFLs. The ATF has really been cracking down on them. Whether you says you can't have a gun shop within X, distance of whatever the public property is, whether it's saying that, okay, you can't have, a gun range in this area because of noise ordinance, even though the range is indoors and nobody's going to hear it because it's going to be closed down overnight. So it's not really disturbing anybody.
Mm-hmm.
They're using all types of these methods. And this is not something that is only happening in your New Yorks, your Californias, and New Jerseys. This is happening in states that you would think are typically very pro-gun. I mean, this has happened in my home state of Georgia. I've seen that happen in the greater Atlanta area. I mean, if you visit, you would think as much green space as we have in the Atlanta metro area, we'd have like outdoor ranges all over the place, but you have to drive, over an hour outside of the metro area to get to an outdoor range. And it's not because people don't want outdoor ranges in the metro area, but it has to do with those type of zoning issues, right? So even in a state that has historically been very, very friendly to firearms, even in certain areas, you have that it can be a challenge. So they're trying any and all ways to get rid of firearms, this particular segment that believes that guns equal violence. So that's just something we have to be aware of, and we have to make sure we're combating by being involved in our communities, making sure we're bringing them this good factual information that we're showing tonight. Make sure that we are participating in organizations like Naga, or if there are other groups that may be, doing good information sharing when it comes to Second Amendment rights and gun usage, supporting them and really integrating into our community. I think one of the things that's been successful with Naga is that we've really pushed that we want to show ourselves as not just gun owners, but good citizens and good neighbors that just happen to own guns. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think coming at it from that standpoint, it allows you to open up a door and really humanize yourself. And then people have to look past just the caricature of what certain people want them to believe about you. It's just, this crazy gun owner. So no, they see it as Chad, or they see it, they see it as Joy, they see it as Doug, or sees, okay, that's Phil. These are good people that care about their community. They're doing lots of good work in the community, and they just happen to own firearms. What's wrong with that? I wouldn't mind if a Chad or Joy or Phil does farms, because I know that they have the best interests of the community in mind. And I've seen how they talk about firearms. I see how they talk about everything with care. They handle their firearms as carefully as they handle their words, right? They don't say anything just silly, because just like when you use a firearm, when that bullet leaves, you can't take it back. When you say things, those words, you can't take those back, right? So if they see that type of care, that type of grace, that type of commitment, it really challenges that belief of the caricature that certain people try to make us as gun owners out to be.
All right, great comments, man. Great comments.
Do we have any more questions in here? We've got a few more minutes, guys. So if you have questions, please go ahead, put them in the chat so we can make sure that we answer them. All right. Let's see. So one question says, does Naga have a list of Black-owned gun shops and ranges? We do, actually. It is on our website. If you go to www.naga.co, naaga.co, there is a tab on there. Forgive me, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we do have a page that lists Black-owned gun ranges and FFLs. So definitely go to our website and check that out. Let's see. Any other questions here? I don't see any other questions. It doesn't look like. Let me do one more check to make sure I'm catching everybody. Oh, okay. I see a couple more. All right. We have a question asked that says, when is Naga going to establish virtual gun clubs to train incoming members from communities with no on-site gun clubs?
We are doing that already.
Yeah, he is right. That is something that we're doing. So we just kicked that off. Was it, I want to say late last year, early this year? I want to think it was early this year. I think we had to delay it. We had some other things on our plate we were trying to work out. But yeah, it is. We did kick that off this year. You can actually go to our website. If you go to our chapters page, you can click on the links for those virtual for the virtual chapters. If you don't see one in your area, you can't find it for whatever reason, just click on the link for the regional director, get a message out to them. They'll make sure that that information that you need to connect with the virtual chapters gets to you post haste. All right, next question says, what are your thoughts on the legislation in New York where part of the requirements for getting approved for concealed carry is to give access to your social media as part of the review process?
Yeah.
We all say no bueno on that. Good day. No
Is it legal? Is it legal?
Yeah, and that's once again, and Phil raises a great question: is that even legal? And I think absolutely that's going to be challenged in the Supreme Court. But once again, all these laws, the point. So those that are passing these laws, all right, you have those that whether through ignorance, and I don't say ignorance in the negative sense of like someone that's bigoted, but I mean I say ignorance in the sense of just literally not knowing. They just literally do not know the information. They only know one side of the story, which is the very loud group that's saying guns equal violence, right? If that's all they know, then of course they're going to look at this at face value and say like, okay, that's a good thing. It's going to help get rid of guns because guns equal violence. If guns equal violence, I don't like violence. Well, let's just get rid of guns, right? That comes to our job, making sure that we get once again, that nuanced and contextualized information to folks so that they really understand what's happening with those laws. Because those that are ignorant because they just don't know the proper information are being led by those that absolutely know what they're doing. They just don't like guns for whatever reason. They just have no affinity for them. They think they bring no social value, even though they walk around in gated communities and are protected by people with guns. They just don't think other people should have them because of whatever reason that has to do with their own selves. So we have to make sure we get the right information. We have to make sure we get that right information to them and ensure that, that's just challenged. I mean, and it's going to take challenges at the Supreme Court level. And once again, like I said, that takes years. That is not a fast process. So in the meantime, unfortunately, people will have to suffer under some unconstitutional, immoral, unjust laws until it can be sorted out through the proper legal channels. Let's see. Looking for any other questions. Let me check, see if I missed anything. Talk about gun clubs, talk about New York requirements. All right, it says, okay, are Black-owned, oh boy, are Black-owned FFLs more, I'm just going to read it word for word because I'm having a hard time understanding. I know you're probably just in a hurry typing, so I'm not going to subscribe anything to you. I get excited too. If you saw my text messages, you would wonder who the heck is this guy and how did he get this position? Because I have fat finger syndrome. But anyways, are Black-owned FFLs more at the government watch list than others? I ask because I know people that have fought firearms from one state but got flagged in their own state. I'm having a little hard time understanding what the question was. I know it's because you were just in a rush typing. So if you could retype that real quick, just so we can make sure we properly understand that question and we can get you an answer to. If you can do that in the next minute or so, that would be great. All right. Next question says, how can I get involved with other Naga members in my area? And this person lives in Massachusetts. Once again, I'm going to refer you to the website. Go to our website, www.naaga.co. You can check our chapters page on the website, get links to Massachusetts chapters. If there is not a Massachusetts chapter, I believe we have at least one. But if there's not one for the reason, you can reach out to the regional director, who also their link is on the page. That'd be in our Northeast region. Connect with them, and they will get you linked up with either virtual chapter, or if you have interest in starting a chapter, they can get you going on that process as well. All right. Looking. Okay. Let's see. Next question says, what is the biggest hurdle for Naga at the moment, and what's the best way for us to help against that? That is a great question. I'm going to defer to Phil, let him give the first answer on that. And then actually do a round robin, because this is going to look different at the national level than it does at the regional and the chapter level. So I want to make sure we get all perspectives there. So go ahead, Phil.
The key word is complacency, relaxing, not being consistent as a community, thinking that everything is okay when it's not okay. I love that we have this conversation tonight. I love the fact that we have Black folks on here that are very, very intelligent. Chad, Joy, Doug, people that are on the comments. But we have to be consistent and to understand that the only way that we're going to do anything as a people is to keep the foot on the pedal, keep pushing our narrative, letting folks understand what our perspective is and not being ashamed of it and standing on those words. That's what we need to do. Don't let a change of electors or politicians in your particular area or nationally make you feel like you're safer, because you're not.
Great answer. Great answer. I'll keep mine brief. Probably the biggest challenge that I see, it's twofold. One is time management. And what I mean by time management is we all wear a lot of hats in the organization. And that's a good thing in the sense because it means that we have a lot to do, and we have a lot to do because that means that people are really involved with the org and want to see big things out of us. But in some ways, we're kind of victims of our own success. We've done such a good job that, it's, the saying that, we kind of joke about in my own workplace is the only reward for hard work is more hard work. Right. So, but I mean, once again, that's a good thing because that means that all of you are involved and you want to see us push forward and want to see these great things. But that can be challenging because we're working with, limited staff. I mean, I think we've got maybe 2 people that get paid full time for that. Phil, that's like what he's getting paid. Look, Phil worked a full-time job for like 40 years and then retired. So he's only really been doing this full time for like the past, year and a half. So right. It wasn't like he was like, oh yeah, I'm just president of Naga. Like, no, this man had a whole job, a whole career and a family because he has kids too, and grandkids, so he's like, he's a busy guy, and we've all got to deal with that. I think every single one of us on this panel is married. I think I'm the only one on the panel that doesn't have children yet, but everybody's balancing career, they're balancing family, they're balancing children, and doing this. And man, if we could just work this full time and pay all our bills, I think all of us would quit our jobs tomorrow. But we can't do that because all that money, like that's going into producing things for you guys out in the world. And we understand that this is a labor of love. Like we wouldn't be here if we didn't love what we do, if we didn't love doing this for you guys. So that's one challenge. The second piece of that is just trying to make sure that we can maintain everybody's patience. And that goes into that first piece. Once again, victims of our own success, but realizing that like, hey, look, we're volunteers. Like I worked I worked all this week. So I went to work, got off work, came home, got prepared for this, and I'm sitting here. Now, I haven't even eaten dinner yet. I'm in the Eastern time zone, so it's like 9:00. So I haven't eaten since like 3:00, but because I was at work, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, this is what we do. And we're often pulling double duty. We do a full-time job during the day, come home and do, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, sometimes at night when we get off to help run the organization, because that's what it takes to get what we have. And we lost Phil. I think he may have had a connection issue, but yeah, I think that those are the 2 biggest challenges. It's just really that time management piece, because we're trying to balance everything that we have in our lives outside of Naga, and also making sure that we can maintain the patience of the people. Because I get it. You want stuff now. You want stuff yesterday. I get it. I understand because we've been starved by from of this type of information, and in some cases. Starved of this kind of commitment because not every organization that's out there for us, I'm just not even talking about the Second Amendment. I'm just talking about just Black organizations in general aren't necessarily for us. They may have a Black face, but they don't have a Black heart, the heart that beats for the community. Right. And so that's a challenge. So I'm gonna stop right there. I'm gonna let Chad speak because I know everybody's, we're getting short on time here. We're a little bit over time, but I want to make sure we fully answer this question. So go ahead, Chad. You're on mute, Chad.
I would say, to your point, the time management piece is certainly a part of it because it's so much to do, and that's despite doing a lot already. There's still so much yet to be done, and then to do so with limited resources, that's a challenge, and that's not a disparagement against anyone or any institution. That's just life because you have to balance not just financial resources, but the resource of your time, the resource of your energy that you have as you're doing other things in life, like you said, career, family, Naga work, any other organization that you're a part of. All of that is consumable or consumes resources that you have, and so you have to make the best, use and allocation of those resources. But the good thing is that this type of stuff is driven from the heart, is driven from the soul. And so you get tired, but you don't get tired, right? You get exhausted, physically because it's just physically demanding, but your spirit don't get tired of doing the work because you realize it's necessary, it's needed, and you feel good about doing it. Not to feel good about doing it for feeling, for the sake of feeling good about it, but you feel good about it because you can see in tangible ways the impact that it has on individuals and the community at large. So if you want to talk about, a struggle, it's just not having enough of, myself or Doug or Phil. We probably need, multiple variants of us doing this work. If you recall the movie Multiplicity or the movie with Michael Keaton when he cloned himself and all of that, that's old school for some folks, but it's stuff like that that's necessary. It's a resource issue, but I'm happy to do it.
All right, Joy, how about you? What's your perspective?
I would say what's feeding into that resource issue from my perspective, we've got to keep a community mindset. There are a few of us doing a lot of work. I work with a lot of instructors and I see the same folks kind of out here educating. But one challenge I've seen, this whole, I'm not going to say obsession, but this whole coming to a realization that 2A belongs to us is exciting for a lot of people. But I'm noticing that folks will go off, they'll learn what they want to learn, and they forget to reach back. So you have the same people. I also notice a lot of division with people who are new to 2A. There's a lack of maybe patience with those. We so quickly forget. Most of us have only been shooting somewhere between 5-7 years, but it's so easy to forget the person who just started last week that needs some help. So I would say one way to answer the question that we can help is some of us who have been doing this for 20 years, just pause for a second and do your due diligence to help the ones who were trying to catch up. Don't make this another elitist opportunity or organization. Instead, let's stick with community, and that will help to spread some of the responsibility across the resources that are so short already.
Awesome. Great answer. So we lost Chad. He had to step away. His time was running short, and we are a little bit over time. Oh, he's back. Okay. I was just excusing your absence, man, but you're with us to the end. I appreciate it. Woo. Okay. Well, we're going to close out for tonight. Like I said, we're a few minutes over, but we want to make sure we get those full answers to the questions. I apologize if for any questions that we missed or weren't able to answer. We're going to have more of these type of live events, so stay tuned for them in the future. We definitely want to have more conversation on this and many other topics. I'm thinking we may do some type of poll or something. Maybe we can, get some feedback from you guys if there's a particular topic that you'd be interested in hearing the panelists speak on. But I want to give a big shout out to everyone in the chat. Thanks for joining us today. Really, really, really appreciate you spending time with us. I know this is kind of long, 2 hours, and thank you guys who stayed with us. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Dr. Allen. Thank you, Chad. Really appreciate great commentary, great enthusiasm. I think everyone really had a good time here listening to you guys discuss these topics tonight. So with that, we're going to close it out. Once again, thank everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.
All right.
Be cool, y'all.
Hey, great job, Doug. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you.